What's up, friends? Isn't it crazy how different things look when you get up close? When you get something under a microscope to take a closer look, suddenly the whole picture looks different. And not only that, you also might learn something you didn't know before. My name is Lauren, and I am not a science teacher, but I do want to talk about science because science is just so cool. Okay, so maybe science isn't exactly the thing you were expecting to discuss at church. I'm sure there are some of you who love science class, like I do. It might even be your favorite subject at school, but there are probably some of you who absolutely hate it. Maybe you think it's really challenging or a subject that's just plain boring. Either way, you're probably thinking, why exactly would we be talking about science at church? I'm gonna talk about science in church by putting science and faith together. So we'll learn a little more about both. Now, I know you might be thinking that when you put science and faith under the microscope, they shouldn't go together. For a lot of people, science and faith seem like complete and total opposites. Neither one is bad, but they just seem like they should be separate categories. Just think about the way people have talked about faith and science in the last couple of years. Anytime the two topics come up in the same conversation, they're typically competing against each other. It's almost like if you're for one, you have to be against the other. From the way people talk about it, it seems like they can't possibly work together. Let me show you what I mean. Okay, so take these two ingredients I have here. This is baking soda. It's just an odorless, solid white powder. And it seems pretty different from vinegar. A clear liquid that smells, well, it smells pretty bad. And at first glance, these two seem like they have nothing to do with one another. But when we mix them, let's see what happens. A little more of this. Oh. Science! And I like to think that science and faith work the same way. At first glance, these two seem like they have very little in common. They seem like two separate topics that could even work against each other at times. But when you put science and faith under the microscope and take a closer look, I think you'll realize the two have more in common than you might think. Okay, let me clean this up really quick. Maybe you're thinking, who cares? Right now, the separation of science and faith doesn't seem to matter much to you. But there will come a point in your life where you'll have to think about it. Part of having a faith of your own means deciding what you believe about certain things. And honestly, that part of faith can be kind of scary. Because what if something you learn in science class doesn't line up with what you read in the Bible? Or what if believing what you know to be true about science makes you question what you thought was true about God? When the world seems to be telling you to choose a side, how do you know which one to choose? What if you want to be team science and team faith? Well, here's the good news. I don't think we have to be afraid of those questions. In fact, I think asking questions and learning about science can actually be a really good thing for your faith. And to prove it, I want to go back in time, because back in the day, some of the world's best scientists, they were Christians. They believed in the Bible and the God who inspired it. In the 1400s, there was a guy named Copernicus who studied the planets and the stars. He actually discovered that the Earth revolves around the sun, and he was also a Christian. In the 1500s, this guy Galileo made a lot of cool discoveries about science. He knew so much that people started calling him the father of science. And guess what? The father of science was also a Christian. And later on, there was a guy named Isaac Newton. He's considered to be one of the greatest scientists ever, but he also spent a lot of time writing and learning about God. And yep, you guessed it, he was a Christian too. And by the 1900s, this guy, William Kelvin, was teaching people a lot about heat and temperature. In fact, scientists still measure temperature using his scale. It's even called the Kelvin scale. And as I'm sure you've guessed by now, Kelvin was a Christian too. Those are all names you've probably heard before at school or in your textbooks, but there are so many more Christians working in science and making incredible advancements in their field today. Robert Selvendron was a scientist whose work focused on plant research. He also worked as a church leader and theologian. Mary Kenneth Keller was a pioneer in the field of computer science. Fun fact, she was also a nun. Amalolu Fagwa is a microbiologist and a Christian faith scholar. He does amazing work to show the world how his studies in science inform his faith in God. Katherine Johnson was a space scientist, physicist. There's so many letters in that. Okay. Katherine Johnson was a space scientist, physicist, and mathematician who directly impacted the first manned spaceflight. And she's also a follower of Jesus. I'm sure we could keep adding to this list with the names of people who have made incredible advancements in medicine, psychology, chemistry, and more. People who have a strong, active faith in God, too. People who have jumped into studying the way things work as a way to understand more about the God who created them. People who want to make advancements in science in order to follow God's call to help those around them. People who believe that learning about science may be a way to learn more about God. Remember the science experiment we did just a few minutes ago? We saw that two totally different ingredients came together to create a cool chemical reaction. And what if I told you that it's only after baking soda and vinegar come together that we truly understand more about each ingredient? When we saw that awesome reaction, it wasn't because baking soda and vinegar were working against each other. It was because they were working together to create something new. And I think the same is true when it comes to science and faith. When we take a closer look at science and faith, we get a better understanding of how they work together. And I think that's the way God meant for it to be. The Bible, which is an incredible record of the relationship between God and humans, gives us some direction when it comes to faith and science. The very first book of the Bible is called Genesis. It's like the opening scene of the movie that lays the foundation for the rest of the story. And the very first words in Genesis, the first words in the whole Bible, well, they say this from Genesis 1, in the beginning, God. The very first thing the Bible tells us is that God was there. Before anything else existed, there was God. That's the first thing we know to be true about the universe. God was there before it all began. And from there, look at what God did. God created the heavens and the earth. The earth was formless and empty, and darkness covered the deep waters. And the Spirit of God was hovering over the surface of the waters. Then God said, "Let there be light." And there was light. And God saw that the light was good. Then he separated the light from the darkness. God called the light day, and the darkness night. And evening passed, and morning came, marking the first day. Then God said, "Let there be a space between the waters, to separate the waters of the heavens from the waters of the earth." And that's what happened. God made the space to separate the waters of the earth from the waters of the heavens. God called the space sky. And evening passed and morning came, marking the second day. Then God said, "Let the waters beneath the sky flow together into one place so dry ground may appear." And that is what happened. God called the dry ground land, and the water seas. And God saw that it was good. Then God said, "Let the land sprout with vegetation, every sort of seed-bearing plant, and trees that grow seed-bearing fruit. These seeds will then produce the kinds of plants and trees from which they came." And that is what happened. The land produced vegetation, all sorts of seed-bearing plants and trees with seed-bearing fruit. Their seeds produced plants and trees of the same kind, and God saw that it was good. And evening passed, and morning came, marking the third day. Then God said, "Let lights appear in the sky to separate the day from the night. Let them be signs to mark the seasons, days, and years. Let these lights in the sky shine down on the earth." And that is what happened. God made two great lights, the larger one to govern the day, and the smaller one to govern the night. He also made the stars. God set these lights in the sky to light the earth, to govern the day and night, and to separate the light from the darkness. And God saw that it was good. And evening passed, and morning came, marking the fourth day. Then God said, "Let the waters swarm with fish and other life. Let the skies be filled with birds of every kind." So God created great sea creatures and every living thing that scurries and swarms in the water, and every sort of bird, each producing offspring of the same kind. And God saw that it was good. Then God blessed them, saying, "Be fruitful and multiply. Let the fish fill the seas, and let the birds multiply on the earth." And evening passed, and morning came, marking the fifth day. And then God said, "Let the earth produce every sort of animal, each producing offspring of the same kind, livestock, small animals that scurry along the ground, and wild animals." And that is what happened. God made all sorts of wild animals, livestock, and small animals, each able to produce offspring of the same kind. And God saw that it was good. Isn't that amazing? Every single thing that we see and experience in creation today was made by God a really, really long time ago. It's all here. because of the God who made it. This includes you and me and every other human being on earth. And while the writer of Genesis may not have given us all the details of how the world works, the writer reminded us that God is the one who created it. Could God have given us the details of exactly how each part of the world was made? Yes. But maybe that's not included in the text of the Bible because God wants us to be curious. Maybe God wants learning about creation and the way the world works to be part of the way we grow in our faith. They say you can learn a lot about an artist by looking at their art. If you have a favorite singer, you can probably learn a lot about who they are by looking at their song lyrics. And if you see a really cool painting, there's probably something in it that can tell you a bit about the artist, about what they were thinking or what they were feeling when they painted it. Or if you read a really great book, there's probably something in it that can help you learn about the way the author sees the world. According to the writer of Genesis, the entire universe and everything is God's creation. We, you and me, are God's artwork. The plants are God's creation. The things we see around us in the world are part of God's art, and the more we learn about those things, the more we can learn about God. In other words, creation points to a creator. When we dive into science and start learning about the world around us, we don't have to be afraid of what it means for our faith. Instead, we get to be excited because the more we learn about the world God made, the more we can learn about God, because creation points to a creator. So what if that's true? That creation points to a creator. What now? If taking a closer look at one can help us learn more about the other, how do we start approaching science and faith in a new way? I think we need to start by doing 3 things. First, be comfortable asking tough questions. Remember, God made every single detail of the world, including you and including me, and God made us with brilliant minds capable of asking all kinds of questions and discovering all kinds of new things. So if you have questions about science, great! Maybe exploring those will help you see new things about God, who made it. Got a question about faith? That's awesome! Maybe by learning about the way the world was made, you'll discover more about God who made it. Being curious about how science and faith work together is a great starting point for discovering more about both. Next, learn about both God and science. For example, did you know that the Earth is placed exactly the perfect distance from the sun? If we were any closer or further from it, we wouldn't survive. I think that's proof that God wants to take care of us. Or did you know that when a baby is born, they can only see a short distance? It's the perfect distance for the baby to see their parents' faces when being held. I think that shows us something about the way God created family. Or did you know that the nerves of the body can be hundreds and hundreds of miles long? I think that shows us something about the way God cares about the details of who we are. The more we learn about both God, the creator, and science, God's creation, the stronger our faith can become. And lastly, talk to older and wiser adults. When we have questions about faith or science, a great person to turn to is a trusted adult like your group leader or your parent or guardian. They can help you wrestle through some of your questions and understand more about creation and its creator. A great place to start learning more about the creator is with your group. So as you dive into conversation today, consider your group a safe space to ask questions, share your thoughts, and grow together as you take a closer look at science and faith. Creation points to a creator. And because of that, we shouldn't be afraid to ask questions or dive into knowing more about science or faith. In fact, here's one question I love for you to ask this week. Where did you see God today? Look for signs of God in the world around you today. Look for glimpses of the Creator in the creation that surrounds you. Let that be a great starting place to discover more about God, who made you, who loves you, and who wants you to grow in your faith.